They said a pregnant woman had no business in a cockpit, that her condition made her a liability to national security. But when Captain Elena Vasquez climbed into that F-22, wrapped her at 8 months pregnant, and executed the most critical air defense mission in a decade, she proved that some people mistake quiet strength for weakness. Preparing and narrating this type of story took us long efforts and hard work. So, if you are enjoying the story, please consider subscribing to our channel. The morning briefing room at Holloman Air Force Base buzzed with the usual pre-flight chatter until Captain Elena Vasquez walked through the door. Conversations didn't exactly stop, but they shifted into something more careful, more measured. At 7 months pregnant, her flight suit stretched tight across her growing belly. She moved with the deliberate precision of someone who had learned to navigate spaces that weren't designed for her condition. Elena settled into her usual seat in the back corner, her hands instinctively resting on her abdomen as she opened her mission folder. The other pilots glanced her way with expressions that ranged from bemused tolerance to barely concealed irritation. She'd been grounded from active flight duty for the past month, relegated to desk assignments and simulation training while her pregnancy progressed. Major Derek Thornton, the squadron's second-in-command, barely acknowledged her presence as he launched into the day's operational overview. His voice carried the crisp authority of someone who'd never doubted his place in the military hierarchy, never questioned whether his body or his choices made him unsuitable for service. Elena's fingers traced absent patterns on her flight folder, a habit she'd developed during long briefings. Anyone watching closely might notice the specific rhythm, the way her index finger moved in groups of 8, then 2, then 7. But no one was watching closely. They saw only what they expected to see, a pregnant pilot who'd soon be taking extended leave, whose usefulness to the squadron was rapidly diminishing. Her apartment in Alamogordo reflected the same understated presence she maintained on base. Clean lines, minimal decoration, everything in its precise place. But hidden details told a different story. The bookshelf held technical manuals that went far beyond standard pilot training, volumes on aerodynamics and weapon systems that most officers never studied. Advanced tactical texts were marked with annotations written in cramped handwriting, notes that referenced flight scenarios and mission parameters that seemed almost impossibly complex. In her bedroom closet, behind rows of maternity uniforms and civilian clothes, hung a flight suit that was different from the others. Older, more worn, with fabric that showed the kind of stress that came from extended high-altitude operations. The name tape had been carefully removed, but faint outlines remained where letters had once been stitched. Elena's morning routine never varied. She woke at exactly 0547 hours, though she was always conscious before her alarm sounded. Coffee, now decaffeinated due to her pregnancy, whole grain toast with almond butter, and a careful review of weather conditions and flight schedules. She drove to base in a practical sedan, the radio tuned to military channels where she listened to operational chatter with the focused attention of someone who understood the significance of seemingly routine communications. At the base medical facility, Dr. Sarah Chun conducted Elena's weekly pregnancy checkups with growing concern. Not about the baby's health, which remained excellent, but about Elena's psychological state. The pilot answered questions with minimal responses, deflected attempts at casual conversation, and maintained a professional distance that felt almost clinical. "Your vitals are perfect," Dr. Chun said during one appointment, glancing up from her charts. "Blood pressure, heart rate, everything looks great. How are you feeling about the transition to desk duty?" Elena's response was characteristically brief. "It's temporary, the mission continues." Dr. Chun had been a military physician for 12 years, long enough to recognize when someone was carrying weight that went beyond physical pregnancy. Elena's medical file contained the standard information, but like many veteran personnel records, there were gaps. Deployment dates that seemed to overlap in impossible ways, medical evaluations that referenced treatments for stress-related conditions without explaining their origin. In the base commissary, Elena shocked with the methodical efficiency of someone accustomed to operating with limited resources. Her cart contained practical items, nutritious but simple meals, everything calculated for optimal performance rather than pleasure. Other families browsed leisurely, children chattering and couples debating dinner choices. But Elena moved through the aisles like she was executing a mission plan. Lieutenant Jessica Parks, a younger pilot who'd recently joined the squadron, sometimes found herself watching Elena with curiosity mixed with concern. During lunch breaks, while other pilots gathered in loud groups to discuss weekend plans or compare aircraft performance specs, Elena sat alone, reading technical publications or reviewing flight manuals that seemed far too advanced for someone stuck on desk duty. "She's different," Jessica confided to her roommate one evening. "Not unfriendly exactly, but like she's operating on a completely different frequency from the rest of us. And the way she looks at the flight line when the F-22s are taking off, it's like she's watching something the rest of us can't see." The truth was that Elena did see things others missed. When jets screamed overhead during training exercises, she could identify aircraft types by engine sound alone. Her eyes tracked flight patterns with the precision of someone who understood not just how planes moved through the air, but why those movements mattered for mission success. During simulated combat scenarios that other grounded personnel watched as entertainment, Elena observed with the intensity of someone analyzing real tactical situations. Her pregnancy had become a source of quiet speculation throughout the squadron. She'd never mentioned a husband or partner, wore no wedding ring, and deflected personal questions with the skill of someone who'd had extensive practice maintaining operational security. Some assumed she was single, others that her partner was deployed overseas, but Elena offered no clarification. What nobody knew was that Elena spent her evenings reviewing classified briefings that arrived through encrypted channels, materials that required security clearances far above her apparent rank. Her home computer, equipped with military-grade security protocols, connected to networks that most base personnel couldn't access. She studied satellite imagery, analyzed threat assessments, and maintained proficiency in weapon systems that the squadron didn't officially operate. The baby moved frequently during these late-night sessions, responding to Elena's elevated heart rate as she absorbed information about global threats and strategic operations. She'd place her hand on her belly, feeling the small life growing inside her, and wonder how to reconcile the responsibilities of impending motherhood with obligations she'd made long before conception. Her car's console contained exactly $827 in loose change, counted and recounted with obsessive precision. The significance of this number, like so many details about Elena's life, remained hidden beneath the surface of her carefully maintained normalcy. Sometimes, during traffic delays on the drive home from base, she'd count the change again, her fingers moving through the coins with the ritualistic attention of someone performing a sacred duty. Major Thornton's attitude toward Elena had grown increasingly dismissive as her pregnancy progressed. During staff meetings, he assigned her to administrative tasks that any clerk could handle, his tone suggesting that her condition made her unsuitable for anything requiring real competence. He questioned her ability to maintain focus, wondered aloud whether pregnancy hormones affected judgment, and generally treated her as a temporary inconvenience to be managed until she departed for maternity leave. Elena endured these slights with the same quiet dignity she brought to everything else, but observant colleagues noticed subtle changes. Her jaw would tighten almost imperceptibly when Thornton made particularly condescending remarks. Her hands would move to her abdomen, not in the protective gesture most pregnant women displayed, but with the precise, controlled movement of someone checking equipment before a mission. The squadron's newest pilot, Second Lieutenant Marcus Webb, fresh from advanced training and eager to prove himself, had begun echoing Thornton's dismissive attitude toward Elena. He made jokes about pregnant pilots being grounded for good reason, suggested that motherhood and military service were fundamentally incompatible, and generally treated Elena's presence as evidence that military standards had become too lenient. But Lieutenant Parks continued watching Elena with growing respect rather than dismissal. She'd noticed that Elena's flight manuals were marked with notations that went far beyond standard pilot knowledge. Her understanding of aircraft systems seemed almost encyclopedic, and during the rare moments when she offered input during technical discussions, her suggestions revealed depth of experience that didn't match her apparent service record. As winter settled over Holloman Air Force Base, Elena's pregnancy entered its final months, and the squadron prepared for what everyone assumed would be her departure from active duty. But Elena continued her evening routines. Her mysterious phone calls to undisclosed contacts, her careful review of materials that seemed far too classified for someone facing transition to civilian life. What nobody realized was that Elena Vasquez wasn't preparing for retirement from service. She was preparing for the most important mission of her career. Major Derek Thornton's office walls displayed his career, like a museum of mediocrity disguised as achievement. Framed certificates from desk assignments, commendations for administrative excellence, and photographs from ceremonial events where he'd stood beside actual combat veterans without ever joining their ranks. His service record showed 22 years of careful career management, strategic positioning, and an almost supernatural ability to avoid deployment to actual conflict zones. The morning Elena entered her 8th month of pregnancy, Thornton called her into his office with the satisfaction of a man who'd finally found the perfect opportunity to assert his authority. He gestured toward the chair across from his desk without looking up from the paperwork he was pretending to review, letting her stand for several uncomfortable minutes before acknowledging her presence. "Captain Vasquez," he began, his voice carrying the tone of someone delivering an inevitable verdict. "We need to discuss your future with this squadron. Your condition has become a distraction, and frankly, I'm concerned about the message we're sending to younger pilots about military readiness and professional standards." Elena stood at attention, her hands clasped behind her back, her face maintaining the neutral expression that had served her well through countless briefings. But Thornton wasn't finished establishing his dominance. "I've been reviewing your recent performance evaluations," he continued, though Elena's file contained nothing but exemplary ratings. "There are concerns about your ability to maintain the physical and mental demands of military service. Pregnancy changes women, Captain. It affects judgment, reaction time, emotional stability. These aren't my opinions, they're medical facts." Dr. Chun had actually documented the opposite in Elena's file. Her reflexes remained sharp, her cognitive assessments scored higher than most active pilots, and her psychological evaluations showed remarkable stability despite the stress of pregnancy in a demanding military environment. But Thornton had spent years perfecting the art of selective truth-telling. Elena's response was characteristically measured. "My medical evaluations indicate full fitness for appropriate duties, sir. I'm prepared to continue serving in whatever capacity best serves the mission." Thornton's smile carried the coldness of someone who enjoyed watching others squirm. "That's exactly the kind of thinking that concerns me. Pregnancy isn't a minor inconvenience to work around, Captain. It's a fundamental change that affects every aspect of performance. And your insistence on pretending otherwise suggests a dangerous lack of self-awareness." He stood and walked to his window, gazing out at the flight line where F-22 Raptors sat. Ready for missions Elena was no longer permitted to fly. His reflection in the glass showed a man who'd spent 2 decades watching others take the risks he'd carefully avoided. "I'm recommending your immediate transfer to permanent administrative duty," he announced without turning around. "No more flight simulator time, no more tactical briefings. No more pretending that your condition doesn't compromise operational readiness. The Air Force needs reliable personnel, not officers who think motherhood and military service are compatible. The cruelty was calculated, designed to provoke the kind of emotional response that would justify his preconceptions about pregnant women in the military. But Elena's training went deeper than Thornton could imagine. She'd learned emotional control. In situations where survival depended on remaining calm while everything around her burned. "I understand your concerns, sir," she replied evenly. "Is there anything else?" Her composure infuriated him. He'd expected tears, arguments, some demonstration of the emotional instability he insisted pregnancy caused. Instead, he faced the same professional competence that had made her an uncomfortable presence in his carefully managed command structure. Over the following weeks, Thornton's campaign against Elena intensified with the methodical precision of someone who'd spent years perfecting the art of bureaucratic warfare. He scheduled her for the most menial administrative tasks during peak operational hours, ensuring she missed briefings on tactical developments and weapon systems updates that might have maintained her professional relevance. Elena found herself assigned to inventory duty in windowless storage rooms, counting spare parts and updating supply databases while her squadron mates participated in advanced training exercises. The work was mind-numbing, designed to demonstrate her irrelevance to actual military operations. Lieutenant Parks watched these assignments with growing discomfort. During a lunch break, she approached Elena in the base cafeteria, choosing her words carefully. "Captain, this seems excessive. Your experience with avionics systems could be valuable for the new pilots, even if you can't fly active missions." Elena's response revealed nothing about her frustration. "Major Thornton is ensuring optimal resource allocation. My current assignments serve important logistical functions." But Parks had begun paying closer attention to the details others missed. Elena's supply inventories were completed with extraordinary efficiency. Her reports contained insights about equipment performance that went far beyond basic counting, and she seemed to possess encyclopedic knowledge about systems that weren't part of standard pilot training. Thornton's next move targeted Elena's credibility directly. During a squadron meeting, he raised questions about her medical fitness, suggesting that pregnancy hormones might be affecting her judgment in ways that compromise security protocols. He cited studies about cognitive changes during pregnancy, carefully omitting research that contradicted his narrative. "We have protocols for a reason," he announced to the assembled pilots. "When someone's physical condition changes dramatically, we must reassess their suitability for sensitive assignments. Captain Vasquez's situation requires special consideration." Second Lieutenant Webb nodded enthusiastically, seeing an opportunity to align himself with command authority. "It makes sense, sir. Physical limitations naturally lead to professional limitations. The Air Force can't lower standards to accommodate personal choices." Elena sat through these discussions without visible reaction, but observant colleagues noticed her fingers moving in that familiar pattern. 827. The numbers seemed to anchor her to something beyond the petty humiliations Thornton was orchestrating. The Major's campaign expanded beyond duty assignments into social isolation. He encouraged other officers to exclude Elena from informal gatherings, suggested that her pregnancy made her unsuitable for discussions involving classified information, and generally created an atmosphere where associating with her became professionally risky. Most officers complied, unwilling to challenge someone with Thornton's connections and reputation for destroying careers over perceived disloyalty. Elena ate lunch alone, attended briefings in silence, and completed her assigned tasks with the same methodical competence she brought to everything else. But Thornton had underestimated the loyalty of certain squadron members. Master Sergeant Jennifer Cole, the squadron's senior enlisted advisor, had been watching the situation develop with the keen eye of someone who'd seen 25 years of military politics. She'd observed enough incompetent officers to recognize when someone was using authority to mask their own inadequacies. "Something's not right about this," Cole confided to Lieutenant Parks during a maintenance inspection. "Vasquez knows too much about systems that aren't part of standard pilot training. Her understanding of weapons integration, electronic warfare, capabilities, operational planning, that's not knowledge you get from routine assignments." Parks had noticed the same discrepancies. Elena's comments during technical discussions revealed familiarity with aircraft capabilities that seemed almost impossible given her apparent service record. She understood classified systems, spoke knowledgeably about threat scenarios, and demonstrated tactical awareness that went far beyond standard pilot qualifications. Meanwhile, Thornton's confidence grew with each successful humiliation. He began making public comments about Elena's condition, suggesting that her insistence on remaining on duty demonstrated poor judgment that called into question her overall fitness for military service. His remarks carried the subtle implication that pregnancy made women inherently unsuitable for serious military responsibilities. Elena's apartment became a refuge where she could drop the careful mask of professional composure. In the privacy of her quarters, she continued her mysterious evening routines, reviewing classified materials that required security clearances far above her apparent rank. Her computer connected to networks that Thornton couldn't access, displaying intelligence briefings that painted a picture of global threats he was completely unaware of. The baby's movements had grown stronger, responding to Elena's elevated stress levels as she absorbed information about developing crisis situations. She'd place her hand on her belly, feeling the small life growing inside her, and wonder how long she could maintain her cover while Thornton's harassment escalated. Her phone rang at precisely 2,100 hours each evening, displaying only a number sequence, 827. Elena would answer with a simple acknowledgement, listen to brief, coded updates, and respond with confirmations that revealed nothing to potential eavesdroppers. These conversations lasted exactly 90 seconds, ending with the same phrase, "standing by." What Thornton didn't know was that his campaign against Elena had attracted attention from sources far above his authority level. His administrative harassment was being documented by people who understood that his target wasn't just another pregnant pilot, but someone whose true capabilities remained hidden beneath carefully maintained operational security. As Elena entered her final month of pregnancy, Thornton prepared for what he saw as his ultimate victory, her departure from military service and vindication of his belief that motherhood and military excellence were fundamentally incompatible. He'd already begun planning the ceremony that would mark her transition to civilian life, intending to use the occasion to reinforce his views about women's limitations in military roles. But Elena Vasquez wasn't preparing for retirement. She was preparing for the mission that would reveal exactly how wrong Derek Thornton had been about everything. Elena's quarters contained artifacts that told a story no one on base was authorized to read. Hidden beneath her regulation military clothing, wrapped in protective fabric, lay a flight helmet that bore no squadron markings. The composite shell showed microscopic stress patterns that could only develop during sustained high-altitude operations at speeds exceeding Mach 2. Scratches along the visor edges suggested exposure to extreme environmental conditions, while the interior padding had been custom molded for extended missions lasting far longer than standard patrol flights. Her bathroom mirror reflected a woman who performed the same ritual every morning at exactly 0627 hours. Elena would trace her fingers along a faint scar that ran from her left temple to her jawline, barely visible unless examined closely. The mark's precise geometry suggested surgical repair of trauma that occurred at extreme altitude where atmospheric pressure differentials could cause catastrophic decompression injuries. She'd cover the scar with concealer before leaving for base. One more secret hidden beneath the surface of her carefully constructed normalcy. The numbers appeared everywhere. in Elena's life with obsessive precision. Her alarm was set for 0547, her coffee finished by 0627, her departure for base at 0827, license plate registration ending in 827, apartment number containing the same digits, and exactly $827 in loose change counted obsessively each evening. Anyone noticing the pattern might assume it represented a meaningful date or personal anniversary. But the truth was far more complex. That Lieutenant Parks had begun documenting these oddities with the methodical attention of someone trained to recognize intelligence patterns. During squadron meetings, Elena's technical knowledge consistently exceeded her apparent qualifications. When discussing radar signature reduction, she offered insights about stealth technology that weren't covered in standard pilot training. Her understanding of electronic warfare capabilities seemed almost supernatural, as if she'd operated systems that officially didn't exist. "She knows too much," Parks confided to Master Sergeant Cole during a maintenance inspection. "Yesterday, she mentioned specific countermeasures for Russian S-400 missile systems. That information is way above our security clearance level. But she discussed it like she'd encountered those systems operationally." Cole had been conducting her own investigation, using her 25 years of military experience to read between the lines of Elena's service record. The documents contained subtle inconsistencies that became apparent only under careful scrutiny. Deployment dates that overlapped with classified operations, medical evaluations that referenced treatments for conditions typically associated with extreme flight operations, and commendation records with blacked-out mission details. Elena's flight simulator sessions, when Thornton grudgingly permitted them, revealed capabilities that defied explanation. She piloted aircraft configurations that weren't part of standard training curricula, demonstrated familiarity with weapon systems that officially remained in development, and executed maneuvers that required knowledge of classified flight characteristics. The computer recorded her performance metrics, but the data was automatically encrypted and forwarded to undisclosed recipients. Her apartment security system operated with military-grade encryption protocols that far exceeded standard off-base housing requirements. Hidden cameras monitored approaches to her building. Motion sensors tracked movement patterns in nearby parking areas, and her computer system maintained constant connectivity to networks that required security clearances. Above top secret. Elena checked these systems each evening with the practiced efficiency of someone accustomed to operating in hostile environments. The pregnancy had revealed new aspects of Elena's mysterious capabilities. During routine medical examinations, Dr. Chun discovered that Elena's cardiovascular system showed adaptations typically found in pilots who'd experienced sustained G-forces far exceeding normal flight operations. Her inner ear structure had been surgically modified for enhanced spatial orientation, a procedure reserved for pilots flying experimental aircraft at extreme altitudes. These modifications, Dr. Chun explained to her colleague during a confidential consultation, suggest exposure to flight conditions that would be lethal for normal aircrew. The surgical precision indicates procedures performed by specialists with access to classified medical technologies. Elena's eating habits reflected training for sustained operations under extreme conditions. Her meals contain specific nutritional combinations designed to maintain cognitive function during high-stress situations. She avoided foods that could cause digestive issues at altitude, maintained hydration levels optimal for pressurized environments, and consumed supplements that enhanced reaction time and spatial awareness. Her vehicle contained equipment that raised questions among observant security personnel. The trunk held survival gear rated for extreme environments, communications equipment that operated on encrypted frequencies, and navigation tools with accuracy specifications far exceeding civilian requirements. The fuel consumption patterns suggested regular travel to locations not recorded in her official duty logs. During squadron briefings, Elena's questions revealed familiarity with operational scenarios that weren't part of standard pilot training. She understood threat assessment procedures for classified mission profiles, demonstrated knowledge of international airspace restrictions that changed based on real-time political developments, and spoke about aircraft performance characteristics that weren't documented in public specifications. Second Lieutenant Webb had begun spreading rumors about Elena's mysterious behavior, but his gossip revealed more about his own ignorance than Elena's actual activities. He speculated about personal relationships with classified personnel, suggested she was receiving preferential treatment due to connections with higher command, and generally dismissed her competence as the result of political correctness rather than actual skill. Master Sergeant Cole discovered that Elena's maintenance requests consistently involved components related to high-performance flight operations. She requisitioned parts for avionics systems that weren't installed on standard aircraft, requested modifications to flight suits that suggested familiarity with extreme altitude operations, and demonstrated knowledge of weapons integration procedures that weren't part of conventional pilot training. Elena's computer usage patterns, monitored by routine security protocols, showed access to databases that required authorizations above her apparent security clearance. She reviewed satellite imagery of international hotspots, analyzed threat assessments for regions not covered in standard briefings, and maintained communication with personnel whose identities were classified above squadron level. The mysterious phone calls continued each evening at precisely 2,100 hours, always lasting exactly 90 seconds. Elena's responses consisted of coded acknowledgments that revealed nothing to casual listeners, but conveyed significant information to recipients who understood the context. These conversations ended with confirmations that suggested ongoing operational readiness despite her grounded status. Her apartment's bookshelf contained technical manuals that weren't available through normal military channels, advanced texts on hypersonic flight characteristics, classified studies on next-generation weapon systems, and operational guides for aircraft that officially remained in development stages. The margins were filled with notations written in multiple languages, suggesting operational experience in international environments. Elena's physical conditioning remained exceptional despite her pregnancy. Her cardiovascular performance exceeded standards for active pilots, her reflexes tested faster than squadron averages, and her spatial orientation abilities showed enhancement that typically required specialized training. Dr. Chun's reports documented capabilities that suggested preparation for extreme operational demands. Lieutenant Parks had begun cross-referencing Elena's deployment dates with classified operation timelines, using her security clearance to access limited historical records. The pattern suggested involvement in missions that weren't documented in standard personnel files, operations conducted under such deep classification that even acknowledging their existence required special authorization. Elena's laundry contained fabric fibers that didn't match standard military uniforms, composite materials designed for extreme temperature protection, specialized weaves that provided electromagnetic shielding, and textile treatments that suggested exposure to chemical environments. The cleaning requirements indicated exposure to substances that weren't part of normal flight operations. Her apartment's emergency supplies reflected preparation for scenarios that went far beyond standard military protocols. Communication equipment for sustained operations without outside support, medical supplies for treating injuries associated with extreme altitude exposure, and survival gear rated for environments that weren't typically encountered during conventional missions. The baby's movement patterns had begun responding to specific stimuli in ways that suggested inherited adaptation to extreme conditions. Elena's heart rate variability showed characteristics associated with pilots who'd experienced sustained high-G operations, and her stress responses indicated conditioning for situations involving immediate Life or death decisions. As Elena entered her final weeks of pregnancy, the mysterious elements of her life continued accumulating. Each day brought new evidence that Captain Elena Vasquez was far more than the grounded pilot Major Thornton assumed her to be. But the truth about her real capabilities remained hidden beneath layers of operational security that even careful investigation couldn't penetrate. The morning would come when those secrets could no longer remain buried, when Elena's true nature would be revealed in the most dramatic way possible. Major Thornton's campaign against Elena entered a new phase of calculated cruelty as her due date approached. He scheduled mandatory fitness evaluations that he knew she couldn't complete in her condition, then documented her failures as evidence of declining physical standards. Each morning brought fresh humiliations, designed to prove his thesis that pregnancy made women unsuitable for military service. The squadron briefing room became Thornton's theater for public degradation. During routine operational updates, he would pause mid-sentence whenever Elena shifted in her chair, drawing attention to her discomfort with exaggerated concern that barely masked his contempt. "Are you able to maintain focus, Captain Vasquez?" he would ask, his voice dripping with false solicitude. "Perhaps you'd be more comfortable observing from the back of the room, given your condition." Elena remained motionless during these performances, her hands folded precisely in her lap, her eyes fixed on speakers with unwavering attention. But colleagues sitting nearby noticed the subtle tightening of her jaw muscles, the almost imperceptible adjustment of her posture that suggested enormous self-control being exercised. Thornton assigned her to equipment inspections during the base's hottest afternoon hours, knowing that prolonged exposure to desert heat would be particularly challenging for a woman in her final trimester. Elena performed these duties with methodical thoroughness, checking aircraft components and updating maintenance logs while perspiration soaked through her maternity uniform. Second Lieutenant Webb had become Thornton's enthusiastic accomplice, echoing his superior's views with the zealousness of someone seeking approval from authority. During one particularly brutal inspection period, Webb made loud comments about special accommodations for special conditions that were clearly intended for Elena to overhear. "It's not fair to the rest of us," Webb announced to a group of junior pilots within Elena's earshot. "We have to maintain full operational readiness while some people get modified duties based on personal choices. The mission should come first, not individual circumstances." Elena continued her inspection without acknowledgement, but Lieutenant Parks observed the way her movements became more precise, more controlled, as if she was channeling rising anger into superhuman focus on her assigned tasks. Her documentation of equipment status reached levels of detail that exceeded requirements, transforming routine inspections into comprehensive technical analyses. Thornton's psychological warfare extended to deliberate exclusion from information that affected Elena's professional competence. He scheduled critical briefings during her medical appointments, then questioned her knowledge of operational updates she'd been prevented from attending. When she requested access to missed materials, he suggested that her reduced capacity made detailed briefings unnecessarily burdensome. The Major's office became a courtroom where Elena faced daily interrogations disguised as performance reviews. Thornton would summon her for meetings that served no operational purpose beyond providing opportunities to question her commitment, her judgment, and her fitness for continued service. "I'm concerned about your priorities, Captain," he said during one such session, leaning back in his chair with the satisfaction of someone enjoying absolute power over another person's career. "Pregnancy requires significant mental and emotional energy. How can you assure me that your focus remains on mission requirements rather than personal circumstances?" Elena's responses maintained the same professional neutrality that infuriated Thornton because he couldn't use emotional reactions as ammunition against her. "My commitment to mission success remains unchanged, sir. I'm prepared to serve in whatever capacity best supports squadron objectives." Her composure during these attacks became legendary among junior personnel who witnessed them. Elena never raised her voice, never displayed anger, never gave Thornton the satisfaction of seeing her break under pressure. But the cost of this restraint was visible to anyone who knew how to look for it. Dr. Chun documented elevated stress indicators during Elena's medical examinations, noting blood pressure fluctuations and muscle tension that suggested someone operating under extreme psychological pressure. Yet Elena's cognitive assessments remained sharp, her reflexes stayed quick, and her professional competence never wavered despite the harassment. Master Sergeant Cole had begun keeping detailed records of Thornton's treatment of Elena, documenting each instance of harassment with the meticulous attention of someone who'd seen enough military injustice to recognize patterns of abuse. Her files contained dates, times, witnesses, and specific quotes that painted a clear picture of systematic persecution. "This isn't leadership," Cole confided to Lieutenant Parks during a quiet moment in the maintenance hangar. "This is a power-hungry officer using pregnancy as an excuse to destroy someone who threatens his authority. I've seen Vasquez handle technical problems that would stunt senior pilots. She knows things that aren't taught in any training program I'm aware of." Elena's work assignments became increasingly punitive as Thornton sought new ways to demonstrate her irrelevance to military operations. He assigned her to file archive duty in basement storage areas where decades of paperwork moldered in inadequate lighting. The work involved lifting heavy boxes that were clearly inappropriate for someone in her condition, but Elena adapted by making multiple trips and organizing her approach to minimize physical strain during these solitary hours surrounded by forgotten documents. Elena discovered records that shouldn't have been accessible through normal channels. Files related to classified aircraft programs, mission reports from operations that weren't supposed to exist, and personnel records for pilots whose names appeared in no official directories. She photographed relevant pages with equipment that materialized from hidden pockets, adding to intelligence she'd been gathering for purposes that remained mysterious. Thornton's campaign reached new depths when he began questioning Elena's mental stability during staff meetings. He suggested that pregnancy hormones were affecting her judgment, cited studies about maternal psychology that supposedly proved women became emotionally unreliable during late pregnancy, and generally created an atmosphere where Elena's competence was constantly under suspicion. "We need to consider the psychological factors," he announced during one meeting, his words carefully chosen to sound professionally concerned rather than personally vindictive. "Pregnancy involves significant hormonal changes that can affect decision-making, risk assessment, and emotional regulation. These aren't personal criticisms. They're medical realities that impact operational readiness." Elena sat through these character assassinations with the stillness of someone conserving energy for more important battles. Her fingers would trace that familiar pattern 8-2-7 against her leg, the movement so subtle that only the most observant witnesses noticed it. But the ritual seemed to anchor her to something beyond Thornton's petty cruelties. The other pilots' reactions to this treatment revealed the moral character of Elena's colleagues. Most remained silent, unwilling to challenge authority or risk their own careers by defending someone Thornton had marked for destruction. A few actively participated, seeing opportunity in Elena's persecution to advance their own standing through displays of loyalty to command. But Lieutenant Parks and Master Sergeant Cole represented a small group who found Thornton's behavior increasingly disgusting. They began documenting incidents, gathering evidence, and quietly building a case that could eventually challenge the Major's abuse of authority. Their investigation revealed discrepancies in Elena's official record that suggested her background was far more complex than anyone realized. Elena's apartment became a sanctuary where she could drop the mask of professional composure and reveal the toll that Thornton's harassment was taking. In private, she would place both hands on her belly and speak softly to the child growing inside her, promising that their mother's strength would be enough to survive whatever challenges lay ahead. The baby responded to these quiet conversations with increased movement, as if sensing the determination in Elena's voice. During these moments, her phone would ring at precisely 2,100 hours, and her responses to the mysterious caller carried undertones of barely controlled fury that suggested enormous restraint being exercised for operational security purposes. As Elena entered her final weeks of pregnancy, Thornton prepared for what he believed would be his ultimate victory, her departure from military service and vindication of his belief that women who chose motherhood had no place in serious military operations. He planned a farewell ceremony that would publicly emphasize the incompatibility between pregnancy and professional excellence. But Elena Vasquez was preparing for something entirely different. Each night, as she completed her ritual count of $827 in loose change, she knew that the moment was approaching when Major Derek Thornton would discover exactly how wrong he'd been about everything. Lieutenant Jessica Parks had reached her breaking point, watching Elena endure Thornton's daily humiliations. During a routine maintenance inspection, she made a decision that would change everything. Instead of filing her standard report, Parks accessed the squadron's classified personnel database, using her security clearance to investigate discrepancies in Elena's service record that had been nagging at her for weeks. What she discovered made her question everything she thought she knew about Captain Elena Vasquez. The file contained gaps that didn't make sense, deployment dates that overlapped with operations Parks had never heard of, and medical evaluations that referenced treatments for conditions associated with classified flight programs. Most disturbing were the redacted sections that appeared throughout Elena's record, suggesting involvement in missions that remained above Parks's security clearance level. Master Sergeant Cole had been conducting her own investigation using the extensive network of contacts she'd built during 25 years of military service. Her inquiries reached personnel at bases across the country, former colleagues who now worked in positions where they had access to information that painted a very different picture of Elena's background. "I made some calls about Vasquez," Cole told Parks during a private conversation in the aircraft maintenance bay. "Nobody will say much, but their reactions are interesting. People who should be willing to discuss routine personnel matters suddenly become very quiet when her name comes up. That usually means classification levels way above normal pilot operations." Dr. Sarah Chun had been reviewing Elena's medical file with growing concern about the implications of what she was seeing. The physiological adaptations she'd documented suggested exposure to flight conditions that weren't part of standard Air Force operations. Elena's inner ear modifications, cardiovascular enhancements, and specialized immunizations painted a picture of someone prepared for extreme operational environments. Chun contacted her colleague at the Air Force Medical Research Laboratory, Dr. Michael Torres, whose work involved evaluating pilots for experimental aircraft programs. Their conversation, conducted over encrypted channels, revealed information that made Chun reconsider everything she thought she understood about Elena's condition. "The modifications you're describing," Torres explained, his voice careful and measured, "are consistent with preparation for sustained operations at altitudes above 60,000 feet. The surgical precision indicates procedures performed at facilities with access to classified medical technologies. Who exactly are you treating?" The answer to that question was becoming increasingly important to a growing group of people who'd begun to recognize that Major Thornton was persecuting someone whose true capabilities remained hidden behind layers of operational security. Colonel Sandra Martinez, recently assigned to review squadron performance as part of a routine efficiency evaluation, had been observing Thornton's treatment of Elena with professional interest that was rapidly becoming personal concern. Martinez had spent 15 years in combat zones where she'd learned to recognize genuine competence beneath surface appearances. During her review of squadron operations, Martinez noticed patterns that raised questions about Thornton's leadership decisions. Elena's work assignments seemed designed for harassment rather than optimal resource utilization, and her exclusion from briefings appeared to violate protocols for maintaining operational readiness. Among qualified personnel, Martinez requested Elena's complete service record through channels that bypassed Thornton's authority, using her colonel's rank to access files that revealed information far beyond what the squadron commander was authorized to see. What she discovered prompted immediate secure communications with personnel at Air Force headquarters who confirmed her growing suspicions about Elena's real background. Lieutenant Parks had begun correlating Elena's mysterious behavioral patterns with historical data about classified operations conducted during the time frame of her apparent service. Using her computer skills and security clearance, Parks accessed databases that contained information about missions that officially didn't exist. Comparing operational dates with Elena's deployment records, the investigation revealed connections that should have been impossible. Elena's service record showed presence at locations during periods when classified aircraft testing was conducted, medical evaluations that coincided with extreme altitude research programs, and training certifications for systems that weren't supposed to be operational during her apparent service period. Master Sergeant Cole had expanded her network of contacts to include personnel at test facilities and experimental squadrons who might have encountered Elena during operations that remained classified. The responses she received were carefully worded, but consistently suggested that Elena's reputation extended far beyond conventional pilot training. "I can't discuss specific operations," one contact explained during a secure phone call, "but if you're dealing with someone who has that particular background, you should understand that her capabilities probably exceed anything you've observed in normal squadron operations. People with those qualifications don't end up in routine assignments without very specific reasons." Dr. Chun had begun documenting Elena's responses to stress in ways that went beyond standard medical evaluation. Elena's physiological reactions during Thornton's harassment showed patterns consistent with someone who'd been trained to maintain operational effectiveness under extreme psychological pressure. Her heart rate variability, stress hormone levels, and cognitive performance indicated preparation for conditions that far exceeded normal military training. The doctor's concerns reached Colonel Martinez through medical channels that emphasized the unusual nature of Elena's case. Chun's report suggested that Elena possessed capabilities that were being systematically suppressed by command decisions that didn't reflect her actual qualifications or potential contributions to mission effectiveness. Colonel Martinez had begun making discreet inquiries at higher command levels, using her relationships with general officers to investigate Elena's background through channels that operated above Thornton's awareness. These conversations, conducted during seemingly routine briefings, revealed that Elena's name was known to people who dealt with classification levels that required special authorization even to acknowledge. Lieutenant Parks's investigation had uncovered references to Elena in after-action reports from missions that weren't supposed to exist. The documents, heavily redacted but accessible through her security clearance, contained language that suggested extraordinary performance under extreme conditions. Mission summaries referenced pilot capabilities that exceeded standard training parameters and operational success rates that defied normal statistical probability. The network of people investigating Elena's background had begun sharing information through unofficial channels, building a picture that contradicted everything Major Thornton believed about the woman he was systematically destroying. Their collective evidence suggested that Elena wasn't just another pilot being persecuted for her pregnancy, but someone whose true capabilities represented national security assets, being wasted through bureaucratic ignorance. Master Sergeant Cole had discovered that Elena's maintenance requests consistently involved components related to aircraft that weren't officially deployed at Holloman Air Force Base, her requisitions for specialized equipment, modifications to standard systems, and replacement parts for avionics that didn't appear on normal inventory. Lists suggested familiarity with platforms that remained classified. Colonel Martinez's investigation had reached levels where further inquiry required authorization from general officers who dealt with black programs and special access operations. Her requests for information about Elena's background had been acknowledged but not answered, a response pattern that indicated involvement in missions that remained actively classified. The growing group of allies who'd begun questioning Elena's treatment found themselves facing a common realization. They were dealing with someone whose true importance to military operations remained hidden beneath carefully maintained operational security. Each piece of evidence they uncovered suggested that Major Thornton's persecution of Elena represented not just personal cruelty, but a fundamental misunderstanding of who he was actually attacking. As Elena entered her final days of pregnancy, the investigation into her background was approaching revelations that would change everything about how her colleagues understood both her capabilities and the magnitude of Thornton's mistake. Colonel Sandra Martinez's secure terminal glowed with classification stamps that required authorization codes few officers possessed. Her investigation into Elena's background had reached levels where continued inquiry demanded approval from general officers who oversaw programs that didn't officially exist. The response to her requests had been immediate and alarming. A conference call scheduled within hours with personnel whose names appeared in no public directories. General Patricia Hawkins materialized on Martinez's encrypted video screen from an undisclosed location, her expression carrying the weight of someone who'd spent decades managing operations that shaped global security without public acknowledgement. Behind her, Martinez could glimpse portions of a facility that looked nothing like standard military installations, with equipment and displays that suggested capabilities far beyond conventional air operations. Colonel Martinez, Hawkins began, without preamble, her voice carrying authority that transcended normal military hierarchies. Your inquiry about Captain Elena Vasquez has triggered security protocols that require immediate clarification. Before we proceed, I need your confirmation that this conversation will remain classified at levels that exceed your current authorization. Martinez understood that she was entering territory where careers could be destroyed by inadvertent disclosure. But her growing concern about Elena's treatment outweighed personal risk considerations. Confirmed, General. I'm investigating what appears to be systematic harassment of a pregnant pilot whose background doesn't match her apparent service record. Hawkins's expression shifted slightly, revealing something that might have been relief, mixed with long-suppressed anger. Captain Vasquez is not just another pilot, Colonel. She's one of 12 individuals worldwide who possess qualifications for operations that remain classified above top secret. Her current assignment represents protective placement designed to maintain operational security while preserving critical capabilities. The revelation struck Martinez like a physical blow. Elena wasn't being hidden from her enemies, she was being hidden from people who might recognize her true value and compromise missions that required absolute secrecy. Thornton's harassment wasn't just personal cruelty. It was inadvertent sabotage of national security assets. General Major Thornton has been systematically degrading Captain Vasquez's morale and professional standing. His treatment appears designed to force her resignation from military service. Preparing and narrating this type of story took us long efforts and hard work. So if you are enjoying the story, please consider subscribing to our channel. Hawkins's jaw tightened visibly. Major Derek Thornton's service record shows 22 years of administrative assignments with 0 combat deployments and no qualifications for classified operations. His understanding of Captain Vasquez's actual capabilities appears to be non-existent. Meanwhile, at the Pentagon, General David Morrison, had been reviewing files that painted a disturbing picture of bureaucratic incompetence. Elena's protective assignment to Holloman had been designed to provide recovery time after operations that had pushed human endurance to absolute limits. Instead, she'd encountered systematic persecution from an officer whose own military experience consisted entirely of desk assignments and ceremonial duties. Morrison's secure phone rang with an encrypted call from Hawkins that confirmed his worst fears about Elena's current situation. Their conversation, conducted in code words that revealed nothing to potential eavesdroppers, established that immediate intervention was required to prevent the loss of capabilities that had taken years to develop and couldn't be easily replaced. Dr. Shun had received a visit from medical personnel who identified themselves only through credentials that required verification through channels she'd never accessed. Their questions about Elena's condition revealed knowledge of her physiological modifications that went far beyond anything in her standard medical file. These specialists understood the implications of Elena's pregnancy in ways that suggested experience with situations involving personnel whose physical capabilities exceeded normal human parameters. Captain Vasquez's pregnancy represents unique medical considerations, explained Dr. Rebecca Foster, whose credentials identified her as a specialist in aerospace medicine, with classification levels that made Shun uncomfortable. The physiological adaptations documented in her file suggest exposure to conditions that would be lethal for normal aircrew. Her ability to maintain operational effectiveness during pregnancy indicates genetic and surgical modifications that aren't part of standard military medicine. Shun realized she'd been treating someone whose medical needs extended far beyond routine prenatal care. Elena's condition required monitoring for complications that might arise from adaptations designed for extreme operational environments, conditions that normal obstetric protocols weren't equipped to address. Lieutenant Parks had expanded her investigation to include cross-referencing Elena's service dates with historical records of aircraft incidents that remained classified. Her analysis revealed patterns suggesting Elena's involvement in missions that had prevented catastrophic failures of experimental systems, operations where pilot error could have resulted in international incidents or loss of critical intelligence. Capabilities. The data painted a picture of someone who'd repeatedly performed under conditions that would have overwhelmed pilots with conventional training. Elena's service record, viewed through the lens of classified operational requirements, revealed a pattern of assignments that weren't given to personnel unless their capabilities exceeded normal military standards by extraordinary margins. Master Sergeant Cole's network of contacts had finally yielded information that clarified Elena's true background. A former colleague, now working in positions requiring ultimate security clearance, had provided carefully worded confirmation that Elena's reputation extended to the highest levels of military aviation. Her name was known to people who dealt with threats that weren't acknowledged in public discussions of national security. "I can't provide details," the contact explained during a secure conversation, "but Captain Vasquez has been involved in operations where failure would have resulted in strategic disadvantages that might have altered the course of international relations. Her capabilities aren't just exceptional, they're irreplaceable." Colonel Martinez had begun reviewing Major Thornton's service record with the same attention to detail she'd applied to Elena's background. What she discovered was a career built on avoiding responsibility, seeking safe assignments, and taking credit for achievements that belonged to subordinates. Thornton had spent 2 decades carefully positioning himself for advancement, while ensuring he never faced situations requiring actual courage or competence under pressure. His combat record was non-existent, despite multiple opportunities for deployment to operational theaters. His training certifications were limited to basic requirements, showing no progression toward advanced qualifications that distinguished exceptional officers from adequate ones. Most damning were performance evaluations that praised his administrative skills, While carefully avoiding any mention of leadership under challenging conditions, General Hawkins had initiated a comprehensive review of Elena's current situation. That involved personnel from agencies that didn't appear on standard organizational charts. Their assessment confirmed that Thornton's harassment had created security risks that extended far beyond personal cruelty. Elena's potential resignation would represent the loss of capabilities that couldn't be quickly regenerated and might be needed for operations that were already in preliminary planning stages. The investigation had revealed that Elena's mysterious evening phone calls connected her to operational controllers who maintained readiness for missions that required immediate response to international crises. Her pregnancy hadn't eliminated her from consideration for these operations. It had simply modified the parameters under which her capabilities might be deployed. Dr. Foster's medical evaluation of Elena had confirmed that her physiological condition remained compatible with operational requirements that would incapacitate normal aircrew. The pregnancy had actually enhanced certain capabilities while temporarily limiting others, creating a unique operational profile that might prove valuable for missions requiring specific combinations of skills and physiological tolerance. As Elena entered her final week of pregnancy, the investigation into her background had reached conclusions that would soon transform Major Thornton's campaign of harassment into the most spectacular career-ending mistake in recent military history. The network of people who discovered Elena's true importance was preparing for revelations that would expose not just Thornton's ignorance, but the magnitude of his threat to national security capabilities he was too small to comprehend. Base auditorium filled with personnel from across Holloman Air Force Base as Major Thornton prepared to stage what he believed would be his definitive victory over Elena. He'd scheduled a mandatory briefing on maintaining operational standards during personnel transitions, timing the event to coincide with Elena's final week of pregnancy, when her condition would be most visible to the assembled audience. Elena entered the auditorium at precisely 1400 hours, her maternity uniform straining against her 8-month pregnancy as she made her way to the designated seating area. Thornton had specifically requested her presence as an example of how personal circumstances can affect professional responsibilities, his words carrying the barely concealed malice of someone savoring anticipated triumph. The audience consisted of 300 officers, enlisted personnel, and visiting dignitaries from neighboring installations who'd been invited to witness what Thornton had privately described as a teaching moment about military standards. Among them sat Colonel Martinez, whose expression remained carefully neutral despite her growing knowledge of Elena's true background. Lieutenant Parks and Master Sergeant Cole exchanged glances from their positions near the back of the auditorium, both understanding that they were about to witness either Elena's public humiliation or Thornton's spectacular miscalculation. Neither knew exactly what Elena's real capabilities were, but their investigation had revealed enough to make them deeply concerned about what was about to unfold. Thornton began his presentation with charts and statistics about mission readiness, using data that he'd carefully selected to support his thesis about pregnancy compromising operational effectiveness. His voice carried the confident authority of someone who believed he was about to prove a point that would advance his career while eliminating a persistent irritant. Physical limitations inevitably lead to professional limitations, he announced, gesturing toward Elena's section of the auditorium. When personnel cannot meet basic fitness requirements, we must acknowledge that their effectiveness has been compromised regardless of their previous performance levels. Elena sat motionless through these opening attacks, her hands folded in her lap, her expression maintaining the same professional neutrality that had infuriated Thornton throughout his campaign against her. But those sitting nearby noticed the subtle changes in her posture. The way her breathing had become controlled and rhythmic, as if she was preparing for something that required absolute focus. Thornton's presentation escalated into direct personal attack disguised as professional analysis. He displayed Elena's recent duty assignments, emphasizing her removal from flight status and reassignment to administrative tasks. His tone suggested that these changes represented logical consequences of her declining capabilities rather than his deliberate harassment. Captain Vasquez represents a case study in how personal choices can compromise military effectiveness. He continued, his satisfaction evident as murmurs rippled through the audience. Her insistence on maintaining active duty status despite obvious physical limitations demonstrates the kind of poor judgment that affects all aspects of performance. Dr. Chun watched from the medical section, her knowledge of Elena's true physiological capabilities making Thornton's words seem not just cruel, but profoundly ignorant. The medical modifications she documented suggested someone prepared for operational demands that would incapacitate normal aircrew. Yet Thornton was presenting Elena as an example of declining military standards. The Major's attack reached new depths as he began questioning Elena's mental fitness, citing studies about pregnancy affecting cognitive function, while carefully omitting research that contradicted his narrative. His presentation included slides about emotional instability during pregnancy that were clearly directed at Elena's situation. Hormonal changes during pregnancy have been documented to affect decision-making, risk assessment, and emotional regulation, Thornton announced, his words carrying across the silent auditorium. These aren't personal criticisms but medical realities that must inform our evaluation of operational readiness. Elena's fingers began tracing that familiar pattern against her leg 8-2-7, the movement so subtle that only the most observant witnesses noticed it. The ritual seemed to anchor her to something beyond Thornton's public humiliation, providing stability that allowed her to endure his attack without visible reaction. Colonel Martinez felt her phone vibrate with an encrypted message that made her blood pressure spike. General Hawkins was en route to Holloman with authorization to terminate Thornton's briefing, if necessary. But the timing was uncertain. Elena might have to endure the full extent of Thornton's planned humiliation before intervention could arrive. Thornton's presentation climaxed with a direct challenge that crossed every line of professional conduct. He called Elena to the front of the auditorium, ostensibly to demonstrate how physical limitations affect basic military bearing. His intention was to force her to perform tasks that would be difficult in her condition, creating visual evidence of her supposed incompetence. "Captain Vasquez," he announced, his voice carrying false concern that barely masked his cruelty. "Please join me at the podium to assist with a demonstration of how pregnancy affects fundamental military capabilities." The auditorium fell completely silent as Elena rose from her seat. Her movement was deliberate and controlled, showing none of the awkwardness that Thornton expected from someone in her condition. She walked to the front with the same precise bearing she'd maintained throughout his months of harassment, her presence commanding attention in ways that had nothing to do with her pregnancy. Thornton had prepared a series of demonstrations designed to highlight Elena's supposed limitations. He intended to have her attempt standard military movements that would be challenging for someone 8 months pregnant, then use her struggles as evidence that pregnancy made women unsuitable for serious military service. But as Elena reached the podium and turned to face the audience, something in her demeanor had changed. The careful neutrality she'd maintained throughout his persecution had been replaced by something harder, more focused. Her blue eyes carried an intensity that made several audience members shift uncomfortably in their seats. "Major Thornton," Elena said, her voice carrying clearly across the silent auditorium, "are you certain you want to proceed with this demonstration?" The question hung in the air with an undertone that suggested Thornton was about to make a mistake of truly epic proportions. But his confidence in his position, his absolute certainty about Elena's weaknesses, made him oblivious to the warning in her voice. "Absolutely, Captain," he replied, his smirk widening. "I think it's important for everyone to understand how personal circumstances can compromise professional effectiveness." Elena nodded once, a gesture that somehow conveyed both acknowledgement and preparation for action. In the back of the auditorium, Lieutenant Parks felt a chill of anticipation as she realized they were about to witness something that would change everything. The moment had arrived when Elena's carefully maintained cover was about to be blown apart by the very person who'd been trying to destroy her. Elena's transformation began, so subtly that most of the audience missed the initial signs. Her posture shifted from the careful neutrality of someone enduring harassment to the coiled readiness of a predator assessing threats. When she spoke again, her voice carried an authority that seemed to emerge from somewhere far deeper than her apparent rank suggested. "Major Thornton, before we proceed with your demonstration, perhaps you'd like to explain to the audience exactly what qualifications you possess to evaluate combat readiness in pregnant personnel." The question struck the auditorium like a lightning bolt. Thornton's confident smirk faltered as he realized Elena had somehow seized control of the narrative he'd carefully constructed. The audience, which had been prepared to witness his triumph, suddenly found themselves watching something entirely different unfold. "My qualifications are well established," Thornton replied, but his voice carried less certainty than moments before. 22 years of distinguished service provide adequate foundation for assessing operational capabilities." Elena nodded thoughtfully, then asked with devastating casualness, "And how many of those 22 years involve actual combat operations, Major?" The silence that followed was electric. Every person in the auditorium who'd served in operational theaters understood the significance of Elena's question. Thornton's face cycled through expressions as he realized he was being maneuvered into admitting his complete lack of combat experience in front of 300 military personnel. Combat experience isn't the only measure of military competence. He managed, but his deflection only made Elena's point more obvious. "Of course not," Elena agreed, her tone remaining conversational despite the devastation she was inflicting. "But it does provide perspective on what constitutes actual weakness versus perceived limitation. Would you like me to share my combat experience with the audience?" Colonel Martinez felt her secure phone vibrate with an urgent message from General Hawkins. "Extraction team standing by. Maintain cover until arrival." But Elena was no longer waiting for rescue. She was conducting her own operation with surgical precision. Thornton attempted to regain control by returning to his prepared script. "Captain Vasquez, we're here to discuss how pregnancy affects military performance, not to relitigate service records." Elena's smile was sharp enough to cut steel. "Actually, Major, I think my service record is exactly what we should discuss. Especially the parts you don't have clearance to access." The auditorium's atmosphere had shifted completely. What began as Thornton's planned humiliation had become Elena's counterattack, and the audience sensed they were witnessing something unprecedented. Lieutenant Parks found herself holding her breath as Elena prepared to detonate whatever secrets she'd been carrying. "For instance," Elena continued, her voice projecting clearly to the back of the room, "you might be interested to know that these numbers I trace constantly, 827, represent something rather specific." She touched her abdomen gently. 827 combat sorties flown in experimental aircraft that don't officially exist. The revelation hit the audience like a shockwave. 827 combat missions represented more operational experience than most pilots accumulated in entire careers. But Elena wasn't finished. Those sorties included operations at altitudes exceeding 80,000 feet, in aircraft capable of speeds that would be classified if I mentioned specific numbers. They involved missions where failure would have resulted in international incidents that could have destabilized global security. Dr. Chen felt her medical understanding of Elena's condition shift dramatically as the implications became clear. The physiological modifications she documented suddenly made perfect sense. They were adaptations required for operating aircraft that pushed the boundaries of human endurance. Thornton stood frozen as Elena continued her methodical destruction of everything he'd assumed about her capabilities. His planned demonstration had become his own public execution, conducted by someone whose qualifications exceeded his comprehension. "The pregnancy you've been using as evidence of my weakness," Elena said, her hand resting protectively on her belly, "has actually enhanced certain operational capabilities. Increased blood volume improves G-force tolerance. Heightened spatial awareness protects both mother and child during extreme maneuvers. Modified hormone levels enhance reaction time and threat assessment." Master Sergeant Cole realized she was witnessing the revelation of someone who belonged to a level of military operations that existed beyond normal classifications. Elena wasn't just defending herself, she was providing a glimpse into capabilities that most military personnel never knew existed. The auditorium doors opened with military precision as General Hawkins entered, accompanied by personnel whose bearing suggested special operations backgrounds. Their arrival confirmed what Elena had been revealing. This wasn't a routine personnel matter, but an issue involving national security classifications. "Major Thornton," General Hawkins's voice cut through the stunned silence, "you are relieved of command pending investigation of security breaches related to the harassment of classified personnel." Thornton's world collapsed in real time as he realized he'd been systematically persecuting someone whose importance to military operations exceeded his ability to comprehend. His face went through a spectrum of colors as the magnitude of his mistake became clear. Elena turned to address the audience directly, her voice carrying the authority of someone who'd earned respect through achievements that couldn't be questioned. "For those wondering about operational readiness during pregnancy, I should mention that I'm currently on standby for a mission that requires capabilities possessed by fewer than 12 people worldwide." Her secure phone rang at that moment, displaying the familiar number sequence, 827. Elena answered with crisp professionalism that transformed her from persecuted victim to operational asset in front of 300 witnesses. "Ghost 7, authenticated," she said, using call signs that meant nothing to most listeners, but caused several special operations personnel in the audience to straighten with recognition. "Confirmed, ready for immediate deployment." The conversation lasted exactly 90 seconds, ending with Elena's acknowledgement. "Understood. Time to destination. 4 hours. Ghost 7 out." She turned back to the stunned auditorium, her pregnancy suddenly seeming irrelevant compared to the authority she radiated. "It appears I'm needed for an operation involving threats to national airspace that require immediate response. Major Thornton, your demonstration of my supposed limitations will have to wait." General Hawkins stepped forward, her expression combining relief with barely controlled anger at Thornton's incompetence. "Captain Vasquez, your transportation is standing by. Mission briefing will commence en route." As Elena walked toward the exit, her movement showed none of the awkwardness Thornton had expected from someone 8 months pregnant. Instead, she moved with the fluid precision of someone whose body had been trained for conditions that would incapacitate normal human beings. The auditorium erupted in chaos as 300 military personnel tried to process what they'd witnessed. Elena Vasquez wasn't just another pilot. She was operating at classification levels that most of them didn't know existed. And she was about to prove that pregnancy didn't diminish capabilities they were only beginning to understand. The secure convoy that arrived to transport Elena consisted of vehicles that didn't appear in any standard military motor pool. Black SUVs with communication arrays that suggested connectivity to command structures operating above conventional military hierarchies, escorted by personnel whose tactical gear and bearing indicated special operations backgrounds that extended far beyond normal base security. General Hawkins approached Elena with briefing materials that required biometric authentication to access, confirming what the stunned auditorium was beginning to understand. Captain Elena Vasquez operated at classification levels that most military personnel would never encounter during entire careers. The situation involves unidentified aircraft penetrating restricted airspace above Area 51, Hawkins explained, her voice carrying the urgency of someone dealing with threats to national security. Conventional interceptors have been unable to achieve engagement parameters due to the intruder's altitude and speed capabilities. You're being activated under Protocol 827. Elena's response was immediate and professional, showing none of the hesitation that pregnancy might be expected. To cause. Threat assessment indicates hostile intent or reconnaissance operations. Unknown, Hawkins replied. The aircraft are operating at altitudes exceeding 90,000 feet, maintaining speeds that suggest propulsion systems beyond current known technology. Your mission is to achieve visual identification and assess capabilities for potential engagement. The audience in the auditorium watched this exchange with growing comprehension that they were witnessing something unprecedented. Elena wasn't just being called away for routine duties. She was responding to threats that required capabilities possessed by virtually no one else in the world. Lieutenant Parks felt her understanding of Elena's mysterious behavior crystallizing. As the pieces fell into place, the obsessive counting, the ritualistic patterns, the encyclopedic knowledge of classified systems, all were manifestations of someone whose operational experience extended into realms that officially didn't exist. Master. Sergeant Cole realized that her investigation had barely scratched the surface of Elena's true background. The woman she'd watched endure months of harassment was apparently one of fewer than 12 people worldwide qualified for missions that involved defending against threats that conventional military forces couldn't even detect. Dr. Chien's medical understanding of Elena's condition underwent complete transformation as the operational implications became clear. The physiological modifications she documented weren't just adaptations for extreme flight conditions, they were enhancements that allowed human beings to operate aircraft that exceeded the normal limits of pilot survivability. Major Thornton stood frozen as the magnitude of his mistake became undeniable. He'd spent months systematically destroying someone whose importance to national security exceeded his capacity to comprehend, using pregnancy as justification for persecution that had threatened critical operational capabilities. Elena's transformation continued as she prepared for immediate deployment. Her movement patterns shifted from the careful economy of someone managing pregnancy discomfort to the fluid efficiency of someone whose body had been trained for extreme operational demands. The change was so dramatic that several audience members wondered if they'd been witnessing an elaborate performance rather than genuine harassment. General Hawkins provided additional context that further emphasized the scope of Thornton's incompetence. Captain Vasquez holds qualifications for aircraft that remain classified above top secret. Her deployment record includes operations that prevented international incidents, involving powers that would consider her identification a significant intelligence coup. The revelation that Elena's identity itself was classified explained her careful behavior, her avoidance of recognition, and her willingness to endure harassment rather than reveal capabilities that could compromise ongoing operations if disclosed. To unauthorized personnel, Colonel Martinez stepped forward to address Thornton directly, her voice carrying the authority of someone who now understood the full scope of his failures. Major, your harassment of Captain Vasquez has constituted a sustained attack on national security assets. Your actions have compromised operational readiness during a period when those capabilities might have been needed for immediate deployment. Thornton's career collapsed in real time as the implications of his behavior became clear to everyone present. He'd used pregnancy as justification for persecuting someone whose qualifications exceeded anything in his own service record by margins. That defied measurement. Elena's secure phone vibrated with updates that she acknowledged with responses, indicating familiarity with threat assessment protocols that weren't part of standard pilot training. Her conversation included references to hypersonic contacts, altitude ceiling limitations, and engagement parameters for unknown propulsion systems. The briefing materials General Hawkins provided required Elena's biometric authentication to access, confirming that her security clearance operated at levels that allowed her to receive information about threats that most military personnel weren't authorized to know existed. "Your aircraft is being prepared for immediate launch," Hawkins explained. "Modified F-22 with enhanced altitude capabilities and sensors designed specifically for this threat profile. You'll be operating at ceiling altitudes that approach the boundaries of atmospheric flight." Elena's response demonstrated the calm competence that had frustrated Thornton throughout his persecution campaign. "Estimated time to intercept? 47 minutes from engine start," Hawkins replied. "The window for visual identification is narrow due to the target's unpredictable flight patterns." The auditorium erupted in whispered conversations as 300 military personnel processed the revelation that they'd witnessed months of systematic persecution directed at someone whose capabilities were apparently irreplaceable for defending against threats they hadn't known existed. Lieutenant Parks realized that Elena's pregnancy hadn't diminished her operational value, it had simply modified the parameters under which her extraordinary capabilities could be deployed. The mission she was about to undertake would prove that pregnancy didn't constitute the limitation Thornton had assumed. Elena turned to address the audience one final time before departing for her mission. "For those concerned about pregnancy affecting operational readiness, I should mention that my current condition has actually enhanced certain capabilities required for extreme altitude operations. Increased blood volume improves G-force tolerance, while hormonal changes enhance spatial awareness and threat assessment." Her words carried the authority of someone whose understanding of aviation physiology extended far beyond theoretical knowledge into practical experience with conditions that would incapacitate normal aircrew. General Hawkins escorted Elena toward the exit, their conversation including references to weapons authorization protocols and rules of engagement for unknown threats that suggested Elena's mission involved more than simple reconnaissance. As Elena departed for what would become the most extraordinary demonstration of pilot capability in recent military history, Major Thornton faced the complete destruction of his career and reputation. He'd discovered too late that some people mistake quiet strength for weakness, and that his target had been someone whose importance to national security operated at levels he'd never imagined. The auditorium remained in chaos as Elena left to prove that 8 months of pregnancy didn't prevent her from executing missions that required capabilities possessed by virtually no one else in the world. The hangar that housed Elena's aircraft existed in a classified section of Holloman Air Force Base that most personnel didn't know existed. The F-22 waiting for her bore no squadron markings, its matte black surface reflecting specialized modifications that extended far beyond standard Raptor configurations. Enhanced altitude capabilities, hypersonic sensors, and life support systems designed for operations at the edge of space transformed the aircraft into something that officially didn't exist. Elena's pre-flight routine demonstrated competence that silenced the ground crew's concerns about her condition. Her hands moved through instrument checks with supernatural precision, her movements showing none of the awkwardness that 8 months of pregnancy might be expected to cause. The flight suit she wore had been specifically modified to accommodate her condition while maintaining the life support capabilities required for extreme altitude operations. "Ghost 7, this is Control." The voice in her headset belonged to someone whose authorization codes indicated direct connection to the Pentagon's highest command levels. "Target contacts are maintaining altitude 90,000 feet, speed classified. Your mission is visual identification with authorization for defensive engagement if threat parameters are confirmed." Elena's response carried the calm professionalism that had sustained her through 827 previous combat sorties. Control, Ghost 7 ready for immediate launch. Confirm weapon status and engagement protocols. Ghost 7. You are weapons-free for defensive action. Unknown contacts have demonstrated capabilities that suggest non-terrestrial origin or technology advancement beyond current threat assessments. In the base control tower, Colonel Martinez watched Elena's pre-flight preparations with growing amazement. The woman who'd endured months of harassment for supposed weakness was preparing to undertake a mission that would challenge the limits of human endurance and aircraft capability. General Hawkins monitored the operation from a secure command center, where screens displayed Elena's aircraft alongside, tracking data for the mysterious contacts that had triggered this emergency response. The unknown aircraft were operating at altitudes and speeds that conventional interceptors couldn't achieve, making Elena's unique capabilities the only option for addressing the potential threat to national airspace. Elena's engine startup sequence proceeded with textbook precision, her voice maintaining steady professionalism as she reported system status to controllers, who understood they were witnessing something unprecedented. An 8 months pregnant pilot preparing to fly a classified aircraft to altitudes where atmospheric pressure approached the vacuum of space. Control, all systems nominal. Request clearance for immediate vertical climb to intercept altitude. Ghost 7, cleared for launch. Godspeed. The F-22's engines screamed to life with power that shook the entire base, Elena's aircraft accelerating down the runway with speed that seemed to defy the laws of physics. Her takeoff was perfect, the aircraft lifting off and immediately beginning a vertical climb that carried her toward altitudes where few human beings had ever operated. At 20,000 feet, Elena's physiological monitoring system showed performance parameters that amazed ground-based medical personnel. Her pregnancy, rather than hindering her capabilities, had actually enhanced her body's adaptation to extreme conditions. Increased blood volume provided superior G-force tolerance, while hormonal changes sharpened her spatial awareness beyond normal human limits. Control, passing through 50,000 feet, climbing to intercept altitude. Contacts visible on enhanced sensors, maintaining formation at bearing 090. Ground control watched Elena's aircraft climb beyond the operational ceiling of conventional fighters, entering atmospheric regions where pilot error could result in immediate death from decompression or thermal shock. Her steady voice reporting position and status revealed none of the stress that such extreme conditions would impose on normal aircrew. At the base auditorium, large screens had been installed to allow the assembled personnel to monitor Elena's mission in real time. The same audience that had witnessed Thornton's attempted humiliation now watched as Elena demonstrated capabilities that exceeded anything in their understanding of human limitations. Major Thornton stood among them, his face gray with the realization that his months of persecution had targeted someone whose importance to national defense operated at levels he couldn't comprehend. Every aspect of Elena's performance contradicted his assumptions about pregnancy, limiting military effectiveness. Control. Visual contact with unknown aircraft. Configuration unlike any known technology. Propulsion systems appear to operate without visible exhaust signatures. Maintaining observation distance while assessing threat capabilities. Elena's aircraft had reached 90,000 feet, operating at altitudes where the sky appeared black, and the curvature of Earth was clearly visible. Her pregnancy had required modifications to her pressure suit, but her performance showed no degradation from her condition. Dr. Chen monitored Elena's medical telemetry from the base hospital, watching biometric data that showed extraordinary physiological stability despite operating conditions that would incapacitate normal human beings. Elena's heart rate remained steady, her oxygen consumption optimal, and her cognitive performance exceeded baseline measurements. Control. Unknown contacts are demonstrating capabilities that suggest technology advancement beyond current human achievement. Recommend elevation of threat assessment to maximum classification levels. Elena's voice remained calm despite the implications of what she was observing. Her training for situations involving potentially non-human technology had prepared her for scenarios that officially didn't exist, but the reality of encountering such phenomena while 8 months pregnant tested the limits of even her extraordinary preparation. Lieutenant Parks watched the mission unfold with growing understanding of Elena's true background. The woman who'd endured Thornton's harassment possessed qualifications for operations that extended beyond conventional military categories into realms that challenged fundamental assumptions about human capability. Ghost 7. Control. Are you able to maintain position for extended observation? Affirmative control. Current condition enhances rather than limits operational endurance. Pregnancy modifications to cardiovascular system provide superior performance at extreme altitude. Elena's response demolished every assumption Thornton had made about pregnancy compromising military effectiveness. Her condition had actually enhanced her capabilities for this specific mission profile, providing physiological advantages that made her more qualified than any other pilot for operating at such extreme altitudes. The unknown aircraft suddenly altered their flight pattern, demonstrating maneuverability that defied conventional understanding of aerodynamics. Elena's response was immediate and precise, her aircraft matching their movements with skill that suggested supernatural understanding of high-altitude flight dynamics. Control contacts are demonstrating evasive maneuvers, maintaining visual contact while avoiding aggressive postures that might provoke hostile response. Elena's tactical awareness showed the kind of judgment that could only come from extensive experience with situations where pilot error might trigger international incidents. Her pregnancy hadn't diminished her ability to make split-second decisions. Under extreme pressure, General Hawkins watched Elena's performance with professional admiration mixed with personal vindication. The pilot she'd protected through careful assignment placement was proving that her capabilities exceeded anything Major Thornton could have recognized or appreciated. After 47 minutes of high-altitude maneuvering that pushed both aircraft and pilot to absolute limits, Elena received authorization to return to base. Her descent was executed with the same precision that had characterized every aspect of her mission, bringing her safely back to altitudes where normal human beings could survive. Control. Ghost 7 returning to base. Mission successful. Detailed debrief will require classification levels above current authorization parameters. Elena's landing was perfect, her aircraft touching down with textbook precision despite the extreme physical demands of her mission. As she taxied toward the classified hangar, ground personnel who'd watched her performance understood they'd witnessed something that would be remembered as long as military aviation existed. When Elena emerged from her aircraft, her pregnancy remained obvious but seemed irrelevant compared to what she'd just accomplished. She'd proven that some limitations exist only in the minds of those too small to recognize true capability when they encounter it. Major Thornton's career ended that day, destroyed by his inability to recognize that quiet strength often conceals capabilities that exceed the understanding of those who mistake authority for competence. Elena's mission had revealed not just her extraordinary qualifications, but the fundamental bankruptcy of assumptions that judge capability based on superficial characteristics. Elena Vasquez had flown the most challenging mission of her career while 8 months pregnant, demonstrating that some people transcend conventional limitations through combinations of training, dedication, and courage that can't be taught but only earned through experience that tests the absolute boundaries of human potential. 3 months later, Elena returned to active duty with her newborn daughter, Sophia, who'd inherited her mother's remarkable physiological adaptations. The base child care facility had been upgraded with security protocols that reflected Sophia's status as the child of someone whose capabilities remained classified at the highest levels and Major Thornton's replacement, Colonel Sarah Martinez, had transformed squadron culture by recognizing that true strength often hides beneath unexpected surfaces. Elena's story became required reading at the Air Force Academy, teaching future officers that assumptions about limitations might blind them to extraordinary capabilities. Lieutenant Parks earned promotion to captain after her investigation skills proved invaluable for identifying personnel whose backgrounds contained hidden depths. Her new assignment involved recruiting pilots for programs that officially didn't exist. Using Elena's story as proof that conventional evaluation methods missed critical capabilities, Master Sergeant Cole established a mentorship program connecting experienced personnel with younger service members who faced harassment or discrimination. Elena served as an unofficial advisor, teaching others that enduring persecution with dignity sometimes required strength that exceeded what appeared on surface evaluations. Dr. Chen published classified research about physiological adaptations during pregnancy that enhanced rather than limited certain operational capabilities. Her work, inspired by Elena's case, revolutionized understanding of how human biology could be optimized for extreme operational environments. Elena's daughter, Sophia, showed early signs of inheriting her mother's remarkable abilities. At 3 months old, she demonstrated G-force tolerance that amazed medical personnel during routine checkups. Elena would hold Sophia during simulator sessions, the baby remaining calm during maneuvers that would disorient normal infants. Mysterious aircraft Elena had encountered during her pregnant mission became the subject of ongoing investigation by agencies that operated above conventional military hierarchies. Elena's detailed observations provided crucial intelligence about capabilities that challenged fundamental assumptions about technological advancement. Elena continued flying missions that required her unique qualifications, now balancing motherhood with responsibilities that few people could comprehend. Sophia accompanied her to classified briefings, sleeping peacefully in a carrier designed to protect against electromagnetic interference from equipment that officially didn't exist. The squadron that had once witnessed Elena's persecution now served as living proof that true excellence transcends conventional categories. Young pilots learned that strength manifests in countless forms, that quiet competence often exceeds loud authority, and that the most extraordinary people frequently hide in plain sight. Elena's ritual of counting to 827 evolved to include new numbers representing lives protected through missions. She flew while balancing motherhood with service that operated at the edge of human possibility. Her apartment still contained exactly $827 in loose change. But now Sophia played with coins while Elena prepared for operations that pushed the boundaries of what pregnant and nursing mothers were supposed to be capable of achieving. 6 years later, Elena was promoted to colonel, commanding her own squadron of pilots selected for capabilities that exceeded normal human parameters. Her leadership style emphasized recognizing hidden strengths, protecting valuable personnel from bureaucratic incompetence, and understanding that true military excellence often appears in unexpected forms. Sophia, now walking and beginning to speak, would point at aircraft and accurately identify their types by engine sound alone, suggesting that extraordinary capabilities could indeed be inherited and nurtured through environments that celebrated rather than suppressed exceptional potential. Elena's story proves that assumptions about limitations often reflect the observer's constraints rather than the observed person's actual capabilities. Sometimes the quietest voices carry the most powerful truths, and the most remarkable people are those who transform persecution into purpose, while never losing sight of what truly matters. If Elena's incredible journey inspired you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more amazing stories of hidden heroes who prove that strength comes in forms the world doesn't always recognize. Hit that notification bell and join our community of viewers who believe that extraordinary people walk among us every day, waiting for the right moment to reveal just how wrong everyone was about what they're truly capable of achieving.